The wind carried a faint metallic tang, like pennies left too long in a damp pocket, as Nora pulled into the gravel driveway of her new home in Blackthorn, a small town nestled in the shadow of Oregon's coastal range. It was October 2024, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and the promise of rain. The house, a squat, cedar-shingled bungalow, sat at the edge of a cul-de-sac, its windows dark and uninviting, like eyes refusing to meet her gaze. She'd found the listing online, a steal for a single mother looking to escape Portland's relentless pace. The town was quiet, the kind of place where people still hung laundry on clotheslines and left their doors unlocked, or so the realtor had said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Nora's daughter, Lila, slouched in the passenger seat, her earbuds blasting something loud and dissonant. At 14, Lila was all sharp edges, dyed black hair, chipped nail polish, and a perpetual scowl that Nora hadn't figured out how to soften since the divorce. "This place looks like it's waiting to die," Lila muttered, barely glancing up from her phone. "It's a fresh start," Nora said, forcing brightness into her voice. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on the gravel, and took in the street. The other houses were neat, with trimmed hedges and porch lights, glowing softly in the dusk. But the house next door stood apart. It was a hulking Victorian, its gables sagging like tired shoulders, the paint flaking off in strips of gray and green. The windows were boarded up, except for one on the second floor, where a single pane glinted, catching the last of the fading light. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the property, tangled with weeds and what looked like the remnants of a rose garden, now choked with thorns. Nora's stomach twisted, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the house seemed to lean toward hers, or the way the air felt heavier as she looked at it. She shook it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. The move had been a whirlwind, packing up their apartment, selling half their furniture, and driving 3 hours with Lila's silence as her only companion. She grabbed a box from the trunk and headed inside, determined to make this work. The bungalow's interior was dated but cozy, with wood-paneled walls and a fireplace that smelled of old ash. Nora spent the first evening unpacking essentials, while Lila claimed the smaller bedroom, taping band posters to the walls with a kind of defiant precision. By midnight, they were both too tired to argue about bedtime. Nora fell asleep on the couch, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table, the hum of the refrigerator lulling her into a restless dream. She woke to a sound she couldn't place, a low, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat muffled by layers of earth. It was 2:47 a.m., according to her phone. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. The sound came again, steady and deliberate, from somewhere outside. Nora sat up, her mouth dry, and listened. It wasn't mechanical, not like a car engine or a pump. It was organic, almost alive, and it seemed to come from the direction of the house next door. She crept to the window, parting the curtains just enough to see. The Victorian loomed in the moonlight, its silhouette jagged against the sky. The single unboarded window on the second floor was lit, a soft, flickering glow that pulsed in time with the sound. It wasn't the steady light of a lamp, but something uneven, like a candle or a fire. Nora's breath caught. The realtor had said the house was empty, abandoned for years after the last owner passed away. No one had lived there since. She watched. For a moment, waiting for the light to flicker out or for some rational explanation to present itself. But it didn't. The glow held steady, and the pulsing sound grew louder, vibrating through the soles of her feet. She let the curtain fall and backed away, her heart thudding. It was probably nothing, A squatter? A prank? Maybe a forgotten light left on by some utility worker? She repeated these thoughts like a mantra as she checked the locks and climbed into bed, pulling the covers tight. The next morning, Nora mentioned the light to Lila over breakfast. Lila, stirring her cereal with a scowl, barely looked up. "Maybe it's haunted," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You gonna call Ghostbusters?" Nora forced a laugh. "I'm sure it's just wiring or something. Old houses do weird things." But the unease lingered. That afternoon, she walked to the end of the cul-de-sac to introduce herself to the neighbors, hoping for some clarity. The couple across the street, the Harpers, were friendly enough, an older pair, with a yappy terrier and a penchant for gossip. When Nora mentioned the house next door, Mrs. Harper's smile faltered. "Oh, that place," she said, her voice dropping. "It's been empty since old Mr. Caulfield died. Must be, what, 10 years now? His daughter tried to sell it, but no one's touched it. Bad history." "Bad history?" Nora asked, her stomach tightening. "Mr. Harper chimed in, leaning on his rake. "Folks say Caulfield was into some strange stuff. Collected odd things, bones, jars, old books. People used to see lights in that house at all hours, even after he passed. Kids swear it's cursed." Nora nodded politely, but their words stuck with her as she walked home. That night, the pulsing sound returned, louder this time, accompanied by a faint hum, like a voice caught in static. She checked the window again. The light was back, flickering in the same second-floor window. This time, she thought she saw movement, a shadow passing across the glass, too quick to be sure. She closed the curtains and went to bed, telling herself it was nothing. Over the next week, the light became a ritual. Every night, around 2 or 3 a.m., it flickered on, pulsing in time with the sound. Nora started keeping a notebook, jotting down the times and details, though she wasn't sure why. It felt like a way to control the fear creeping into her days. Lila noticed her mother's distraction but didn't press, too caught up in her own world of music and text messages. Nora didn't tell her about the hum or the shadow. She didn't want to scare her. One evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Nora decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and slipped on her coat, her pulse quickening as she stepped outside. The air was cold, the kind of damp chill that settled into your bones. The Victorian loomed in the dark, its unboarded window a faint glow against the boarded ones. She approached the fence, her flashlight beam cutting through the weeds. The gate was padlocked, but the chain was loose, rusted through in places. She hesitated, then slipped through a gap, her coat snagging on a thorn. The front yard was a jungle of overgrown grass and brambles, the air heavy with the smell of decay. The porch steps sagged under her weight, creaking loudly enough to make her wince. The front door was boarded shut, but one of the planks was loose, hanging by a single nail. She pried it back, just enough to peer inside. The air smelled of dust and something sharper, like vinegar gone sour. Her flashlight revealed a hallway cluttered with debris, broken furniture, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and what looked like jars filled with dark liquid, lined up against the wall. She stepped back, her breath shallow. This was a mistake. She should call the police, let them handle it. But as she turned to leave, she heard it, a low hum, clearer now, coming from upstairs. It wasn't just a sound, it was a voice or the suggestion of one, weaving through the pulse like a thread. She froze, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The hum grew louder, then stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, sharp creak, like a footstep on a loose floorboard. Nora ran. She didn't stop until she was back in her own house, the door locked behind her. She checked on Lila, who was fast asleep, her earbuds tangled on the pillow. Nora didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch, the flashlight still in her hand, listening for the hum. It didn't come. The next day, she called the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived an hour later, a young man with a bored expression who walked through the Victorian with a flashlight of his own. He found nothing, no signs of a break-in, no lights, no jars. Probably kids, he said, shrugging. Or maybe raccoons. Old houses like this, they attract all sorts of things. Nora didn't mention the hum or the shadow. She didn't want to sound unhinged, but she'd bought heavier curtains and started leaving the porch light on. The light in the Victorian stopped for a few nights, and she dared to hope it was over. Then, on a rainy Thursday, Lila came home from school pale and quiet, her backpack slung low. "Mom," she said, her voice small. "I saw someone in the window today, the one that's not boarded up. They were just standing there, looking at me." Nora's heart sank. She pulled Lila close, something she hadn't done in months, and promised to figure it out. That night, she stayed up, watching the window from her bedroom. The light came on at 2:13 a.m., pulsing as always. But this time, the shadow was unmistakable, a figure, tall and thin, standing motionless, facing her house. The hum returned, louder, almost a chant, words she couldn't make out but felt in her chest. She didn't call the police again. Instead, she went to the library the next day, digging through old newspapers and town records. She found mentions of Caulfield, the house's last owner. He'd been a recluse, a collector of esoteric artifacts, according to one article. Another mentioned rumors of rituals, late-night gatherings, and a fire that had nearly gutted the house decades ago. His daughter, the one who'd tried to sell the place, had disappeared shortly after his death. No one knew where. Nora started sleeping in Lila's room, a baseball bat by her side. The hum grew louder each night, the light brighter, the shadow clearer. One night, she woke to find Lila standing by the window, staring at the Victorian. "It's calling me," Lila whispered, her voice flat, like she was reciting something. Nora pulled her away, her hands shaking, and boarded up their own windows the next day. The final night, the hum was deafening, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from everywhere, under the floor, behind the walls, inside her skull. The light in the Victorian blazed, not flickering now, but steady, like a beacon. Nora grabbed Lila and her keys, ready to drive to a motel, anywhere but here. But as she opened the front door, she saw it. Footprints in the mud, leading from the Victorian's gate to her porch. They stopped at her doorstep, fresh and deep, with no prints leading away. She slammed the door, her hands fumbling with the lock. The hum stopped, replaced by silence, so heavy it felt like a weight. Then a knock. Soft, deliberate, 3 times. Lila whimpered, clutching Nora's arm. Nora didn't answer. She backed away, pulling Lila toward the back door, but the knock came again, louder, from every window, every wall, like the house itself was demanding entry. They left that night, staying with a friend in Portland. Nora never went back. The realtor called a week later, saying the Victorian had burned down, no cause found. The lot was cleared, the debris hauled away, but Nora couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. Lila started drawing. In her sketchbook, strange, spiraling shapes that looked like eyes, like the window she'd seen. And sometimes, late at night, Nora thought she heard it. A faint hum, pulsing in the dark, waiting. The air in Coldwater, Maine, was sharp with the scent of salt and seaweed, carried on a wind that never seemed to settle. It was late September 2024 when Julian moved into the second-floor apartment of a weathered duplex on a narrow street overlooking the harbor. The building was old, its clapboard siding faded to a dull gray, the kind of place that looked like it had been standing since the town's fishing heyday. Julian, a freelance illustrator in his late 20s, had chosen Coldwater for its isolation, a place to focus on his work after a messy breakup had left him craving solitude. The rent was cheap, the landlord indifferent, and the view of the churning Atlantic was a bonus he hadn't expected. The apartment itself was small but functional. A living room with a sagging couch, a kitchenette with a perpetually dripping faucet, and a bedroom with a single window that rattled in the wind. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the walls carried a faint musty smell, like damp paper left too long in a box. Julian didn't mind. He set up his drawing tablet on a wobbly desk by the window, where the gray light of the coast suited his mood. The only other tenant was the woman downstairs, Mrs. Verna Hale, who the landlord described as quiet, keeps to herself. Julian saw her once during the move-in, a slight figure in a wool coat, her gray hair pinned tightly, slipping out the front door with a grocery bag. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, and he was fine with that. The first few days were uneventful. Julian spent his time sketching, listening to lo-fi playlists, and adjusting to the rhythm of the town, the distant clang of buoys, the occasional cry of gulls, the low hum of fishing boats returning at dawn. But on the fourth night, he woke to a sound he couldn't place. It was faint, a soft tapping, like fingernails on wood, coming from below his bedroom floor. He lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The tapping grew rhythmic, deliberate, almost like a code. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. He glanced at his phone. 3:12 a.m. The sound continued for maybe 10 minutes before fading into silence. Julian told himself it was nothing. Old buildings made noises, pipes, settling wood, maybe a mouse. He'd lived in enough creaky apartments to know better than to jump to conclusions. But the next night, it came again, louder this time. The same pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. He got out of bed, pressed his ear to the floor, and listened. The sound was clearer now, not just tapping but accompanied by a faint scraping, like something being dragged across a rough surface. It stopped abruptly, as if whoever, or whatever, was making it had sensed him listening. That be why morning. Julian was rattled but determined to stay rational. He knocked on Verna's door, figuring he'd introduce himself and subtly ask about the noise. No answer. The curtains in her window were drawn tight, and the porch light was off, though he noticed a faint smear of dirt on the doorstep, like someone had tracked mud inside. He left a note under her door, polite and casual. "Hi, I'm Julian, your upstairs neighbor. Heard some noises last night. Everything okay? Let me know if you want to grab coffee sometime." He didn't expect a reply, and he didn't get one. The tapping continued every night, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always in that same pattern. Julian started sleeping with earplugs, but the sound seemed to cut through, vibrating in his chest. He began noticing other things, too. His sketchbooks, left open on his desk, would be closed when he woke up, the pages slightly creased. The faucet, which he'd tightened himself, started dripping again, leaving rusty stains in the sink. Once, he found a single wet footprint on the kitchen floor, small, bare, with toes too long and thin to be his. He mopped it up, his hands shaking, and told himself it was a leak. A week in, he ran into Verna outside. She was watering a pot of wilted geraniums on her porch, her movements slow and deliberate. Up close, she looked older than he'd thought, maybe. In her 70s, her face etched with deep lines, her eyes a pale blue that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Morning," Julian said, forcing a smile. "I'm Julian, from upstairs." She paused, her watering can tilted, water spilling onto the porch. "I know who you are," she said, her voice low and gravelly, like she hadn't spoken in days. "You're the one who leaves lights on all night." Julian blinked, caught off guard. He did leave a lamp on sometimes, but how would she know? Her windows faced the street, not his apartment. Yeah, sorry if it's bright. I've been hearing some noises at night, like tapping. You hear anything like that?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Old houses," she said, turning back to her flowers. "They talk." That night, the tapping was louder, almost insistent, accompanied by a new sound, a faint, breathy whistle, like air escaping a cracked pipe. Julian couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, the sound clawing at his nerves. He grabbed his phone and recorded it, the audio capturing the eerie rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, whistle. He played it back, hoping to convince himself it was just the building, but the whistle sounded too human, too much like a sigh. The next day, he went to the library, a small brick building near the harbor. The librarian, a cheerful woman named Ellen, listened to his story with a mix of amusement and concern. "Verna Hale," she said, lowering her voice. "She's been in that duplex forever. Keeps to herself, but people talk. Her husband disappeared back in the 90s. Fishing accident, they said, but no body was ever found. She never left the house after that, not for years. Some folks think she's not all there." Julian asked about the duplex itself. Ellen dug through a box of old records and found a few articles. The building had a history. Built in the 1920s, it had been a boarding house for fishermen, then a private home. In the 80s, there'd been a fire in the basement, cause unknown, that left strange burn marks, like claw scratches, one report said. The previous upstairs tenant, a young woman, had moved out abruptly, claiming she heard voices in the walls. Julian left the library with a knot in his stomach. That night, he set up his phone to record again, placing it on the floor near his bed. The tapping started at 2:47 a.m., followed by the whistle, louder now, almost mournful. But this time, there was something else, a faint murmur, like words spoken underwater. He played the recording back in the morning, his hands trembling. The murmur was clearer than he'd expected. "Stay, don't go," repeated in a loop. In a voice that wasn't Verna's, wasn't anyone's he recognized. He knocked on Verna's door again, this time with a firmer resolve. No answer. He tried the landlord, a gruff man named Carl who lived across town. Carl sighed over the phone. "Verna's paid up for the year. She doesn't bother me. I don't bother her. You sure it's not just pipes?" Julian wasn't sure of anything anymore. He started sleeping in the living room, as far from the bedroom floor as he could get. But the sounds followed, now accompanied by a new sensation, a cold spot in the apartment, always in the same corner of the living room, where the air felt heavy, like standing in a freezer. One night, he woke to find his sketchbook open on the coffee table, a new drawing on the page, a crude, childlike sketch of a man with hollow eyes and long, clawed hands, standing in a doorway. Julian hadn't drawn it. He confronted Verna the next morning, catching her as she stepped out for her mail. "Mrs. Hale, I need to talk to you. The noises, the tapping, it's coming from your apartment, and my things are being moved. I need to know what's going on." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she looked less frail, almost sharp. "You're stirring things up," she said, her voice low. You should leave well enough alone." Stirring what up? Julian pressed, his frustration boiling over. "There's something in this house, and I think you know what it is." She stepped closer, her breath sour. "You don't know what you're asking for, boy. Some doors don't open just once." She turned and shuffled back inside, the door clicking shut. That night, Julian set up a camera, an old webcam he'd rigged to his laptop, pointed at the living room corner. He stayed up, watching the feed, his eyes burning with exhaustion. At 3:04 a.m., the tapping started, followed by the whistle, then the murmur. On the screen, the cold spot seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off pavement. Then, a shape, faint, translucent, like smoke curling into a human form. It hovered, its edges blurring, then moved toward the camera, its face indistinct but its eyes dark and endless. The feed cut out. Julian didn't sleep. He packed a bag, ready to leave, but something stopped him, a need to understand, to confront whatever this was. He went downstairs at dawn, his heart pounding, and found Verna's door unlocked. He pushed it open, the air inside thick with the smell of salt and rot. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn, but he saw her sitting in an armchair, staring at the floor. The tapping was loud now, coming from beneath her, from the basement. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice shaking. "What's down there?" She didn't look up. "He never left," she whispered. "I tried to keep him quiet, but you kept listening." Julian's flashlight beam found the basement door in the hallway, its lock rusted but loose. He pried. It opened, the hinges screaming. The stairs descended into darkness, the air cold and damp, like stepping into a cave. At the bottom, his light caught something, a pile of bones, small and brittle, arranged in a circle. In the center was a jar, filled with a dark, viscous liquid that seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls. He ran, slamming the door behind him, and grabbed Verna's arm. "What is that?" he shouted. Her eyes met his, empty and cold. "It's what's left," she said, "and it's hungry." Julian left that day, crashing on a friend's couch in Portland. He never went back. The landlord called a week later, saying Verna had moved out without notice, leaving the apartment empty. The basement door was locked again, the jar gone. Julian deleted the webcam footage, burned the sketchbook, and tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, he hears it, a faint tap tap tap, pause, tap tap, like a message he was never meant to answer. The frost had just begun to settle on the grass in Eldridge, a small town tucked into the rolling hills of upstate New York, when Claire rented the house on Hollow Lane. It was November 2024, and the air carried the crisp bite of approaching winter, laced with the faint sweetness of decaying leaves. Claire, a 32-year-old archivist with a penchant for quiet and a recent inheritance that allowed her to leave her city job, wanted a place to start over. Eldridge seemed perfect, a sleepy town with a single diner, a library that smelled of old paper, and streets lined with maples that glowed red under the autumn sun. The house was a two-story colonial, its white paint chipped but charming, with a wraparound porch and a garden overgrown with ivy. The rent was suspiciously low, but the landlord, a brisk woman named Marjorie, assured her it was just a matter of the market being slow. Claire moved in alone, her only company a stack of historical manuscripts she'd brought to catalog for a freelance project. The house felt too big for one person, its rooms echoing with the creak of floorboards and the hum of an ancient furnace. The windows rattled in their frames, and the attic door, tucked at the end of the upstairs hall, had a habit of swinging open despite its rusty latch. Claire didn't mind. She liked old houses, their quirks, their stories. She spent her days sorting through yellowed letters and faded maps, losing herself in the past, and her nights sipping tea by the fireplace, the silence of eldritch rapping around her like a blanket. The first sign of trouble came on her third night. She was reading in bed, the wind howling outside, when she heard a sound, a soft, deliberate optionally. You can write thump instead of bump. It's less casual and fits the tone better. Thump, like something heavy falling to the floor. It came from downstairs, sharp and singular, near the kitchen. Claire froze, her books slipping from her hands. The house was locked, the alarm set. She grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs, her bare feet cold on the wood. The kitchen was empty, the back door secure, but a single glass lay shattered on the floor, glinting in the moonlight. She hadn't left it there. She swept it up, her heart racing, and checked every room. Nothing else was out of place. The next night, it happened again. Another thump, this time from the living room. She found a picture frame face down on the floor, its glass cracked, a photo of the house's previous owners, a smiling couple from the 1950s, staring up at her. Claire's skin prickled. She'd hung the frame on the wall herself, and it was too high to have fallen by accident. She called Marjorie the next morning, asking if anyone else had a key. Marjorie laughed, a short, dry sound. That house has been empty for years, dear. You've got the only keys. Probably just settling. Old places do that. But Claire wasn't convinced. She started noticing other things. Her manuscripts, meticulously organized on her desk, were rearranged overnight. Some pages folded or missing. The attic door creaked open every morning, no matter how tightly she secured it. And at night, she began to hear whispers, not words, but a low, sibilant murmur, like voices arguing in a distant room. She bought a lock for the attic door and stopped sleeping with the lights off, her dreams haunted by the sound of breaking glass point one afternoon. She visited the town's historical society, a cramped office above the library run by a man named Harold, who wore thick glasses and smelled of pipe tobacco. She asked about the house on Hollow Lane, hoping for answers. Harold's face tightened. That place, he said, pushing a stack of papers aside, belonged to the Warrens back in the day. Nice couple, but they had a rough go. Their son, Thomas, went missing in '58, just vanished. Police thought he ran away, but the Warrens never believed it. They stayed in that house till they died, waiting for him to come back. Claire's mouth went dry. What happened to them? Died in a fire, Harold said. Winter of '62. Faulty wiring, they said, but some folks thought it was arson. No proof, though. The house was rebuilt, but it's been hard to keep tenants. People say it feels wrong. Claire drove home, her mind racing. That night, the thump came again, louder, from the attic. She grabbed a kitchen knife and unlatched the attic door, her flashlight beam trembling. The stairs were narrow, the air thick with dust and a sour, metallic smell. At the top, she found a small room, empty except for a wooden chest in the corner, its lid ajar. Inside were children's toys, a rusted tricycle wheel, a cloth doll with one eye missing, a stack of drawings in faded crayon. They depicted a boy, alone, standing in a field, his face scribbled out. She heard the murmur then, clear and close, behind her. You found it. The voice was small, like a child's, but hollow, as if spoken through a long tunnel. Claire spun around, the knife raised, but the attic was empty. The door slammed shut below, the lock clicking into place. She pounded on it, shouting, her voice muffled by the heavy air. The murmur came again, from all directions now. Stay with me. Claire forced the door open, her shoulder bruised, and ran downstairs, grabbing her phone to call the police. They arrived within the hour, two officers who searched the house and found nothing. No chest, no toys, no sign of the attic door being forced. Could be the wind, one said, eyeing her warily. Or maybe you're overtired. Moving's stressful. She didn't argue. She bought a security camera the next day, setting it up in the attic. For 2 nights, it recorded nothing but darkness. On the 3rd night, the footage showed a flicker, a small, pale figure standing by the chest, its head tilted, staring at the camera. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. Claire watched the video, her hands shaking, and saw the figure move closer, its face blurred but its eyes dark, unblinking. The camera cut out. When she checked the attic, the chest was gone. She stopped sleeping. The murmurs grew louder, now joined by footsteps, small, uneven, circling the house at night. She found scratches on the inside of the attic door, thin and jagged, like fingernails. One morning, she woke to find a crayon drawing on her bedside table, a boy with no face, holding a knife. She packed a bag, ready to leave, but the car wouldn't start. The battery was dead, though she'd driven it the day before. She called Marjorie, who promised to send a mechanic, but her voice sounded distant, almost amused. That night, the power went out. The house was swallowed in darkness, the only sound. The wind and the murmurs, now a chorus of voices chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." Claire lit candles, her hands trembling, and sat in the living room, the knife in her lap. The thump came from the attic, followed by the creak of the door opening. She didn't move. Footsteps descended the stairs, slow and deliberate, stopping just outside the room. A small hand pushed the door open, and a figure stood in the shadows. A boy, no taller than 4 feet, his face obscured, holding a toy knife. Claire screamed, scrambling to her feet. The boy didn't move, but the murmurs grew deafening, filling the house. She ran to the back door, fumbling with the lock, and stumbled into the yard, the cold grass biting her feet. The murmurs stopped. She turned, expecting to see the boy, but the doorway was empty. She ran to the diner, the only place open, and called a friend to pick her up. Claire never returned to Hollow Lane. She stayed with her friend in Albany, selling the house's lease back to Marjorie, who didn't ask questions. A month later, she heard the house had been torn down, the lot left empty. The official report cited structural issues, but rumors in Eldridge spoke of bones found in the attic, small, brittle, too old to identify. Claire burned the crayon drawing and deleted the camera footage, but she still checks her locks twice at night. Sometimes, in the quiet, she hears a thump, faint and far away, like a memory that won't stay buried. The house on Hollow Lane stood as a monument to its own secrets, a place where time seemed to snag, trapping fragments of the past in its walls. Claire's escape marked the end of her chapter, but not the end of the house's influence. The lot, now cleared, remained untouched by developers, as if the ground itself carried a warning. In Eldridge, people stopped talking about the Warrens, but the older residents still crossed the street to avoid walking past the empty plot. Claire moved to a city apartment, trading silence for the hum of traffic, but she never opened another old manuscript. The boy's blurred face lingered in her mind, a shadow that flickered in quiet moments, a reminder that some houses hold more than memories. They hold something alive, something that watches and waits. The town of Marrow's End, nestled in the fog-draped hills of Northern California, was the kind of place where the mist never quite lifted, clinging to the pines like a second skin. It was early December 2024 when Samir arrived, his pickup truck rattling down a rutted road that led to a small rental cottage on the edge of town. At 35, Samir was a carpenter by trade, his hands calloused from years of shaping wood, his eyes carrying the weight of a life spent moving from one job to the next. He'd come to Marrow's Inn for a contract, restoring a century-old church that had fallen into disrepair, and the cottage, a single-story affair with a sloped roof and a porch sagging under the weight of neglect, was a temporary home. The rent was dirt cheap. The landlord, a distant voice on the phone who'd mailed him the keys with a curt note. Keep the gate locked. The cottage sat at the end of a gravel lane, flanked by dense forest on one side and a narrow field on the other, where a single stone wall marked the boundary of the neighboring property. Beyond the wall stood a house, or what was left of it, a sprawling, half-collapsed structure of blackened timber and broken windows, its chimney leaning like a broken spine. Samir assumed it was abandoned, a relic of some long-forgotten fire. He didn't think much of it at first. He was too busy settling in, unpacking his tools, and sketching plans for the church's pews. The cottage was sparse but livable, with a wood stove that hissed and popped, a kitchen that smelled of old linoleum, and a bedroom window that overlooked the field and the ruined house beyond. The first night, Samir slept deeply, lulled by the quiet of the town and the distant hoot of an owl. But at 4:17 a.m., he woke to a sound, a metallic clink, sharp and deliberate, like a key turning in a lock. It came from outside, near the front door. He lay still, his breath shallow, waiting for it to repeat. It didn't. He got up, checked the door, locked, the deadbolt firm, and peered through the window. The lane was empty, the fog curling under the street lamp like smoke. He chalked it up to the strangeness of a new place and went back to bed. Though sleep didn't come easily, the next morning he found something odd, a single key, rusted and heavy, lying on the porch steps. It wasn't one of his, and it didn't fit the cottage's locks. He pocketed it, figuring it belonged to the landlord, and left for the church site. The day passed in a blur of sawdust and measurements, but when he returned at dusk, the key was gone from his pocket. He searched his truck, his toolbox, the cottage floor, nothing. That night, the clink came again, louder, followed by a faint scraping, like metal dragged across stone. It seemed to come from the field, near the stone wall. Samir grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the air cold and damp against his skin. The beam cut through the fog, revealing the field's tall grass and the wall's uneven stones. Beyond it, the ruined house loomed, its broken windows like empty sockets. He thought he saw a flicker, a brief glint of light from one of the upper windows, but when he focused the beam, it was gone. The scraping stopped, replaced by silence so thick it felt like a presence. He went back inside, locking the door, and checking it twice. Over the next few days, the clinking became a nightly ritual, always between 3 and 5 a.m., always near the wall or the cottage door. Samir started leaving the porch light on, but it didn't help. He found more keys, on the kitchen counter, under his pillow, inside a boot, each different, each rusted, none fitting any lock he could find. He kept them in a tin on the counter, their weight unsettling, as if they carried a story he didn't want to hear. He asked the landlord about them, but the man was vague, saying only, "Old places collect things. Toss them if they bother you." Samir didn't toss them. He couldn't. Say why. Instead, he visited the town's only bar, a dimly lit place called The Anchor, hoping for answers. The bartender, a wiry man named Cal with a tattooed forearm, listened to Samir's story over a pint. "That house," Cal said, wiping a glass. belonged to Elias Morrow. Town's named after his family. He was a locksmith. Back in the day, made keys for half the county. Went mad after his wife died in a fire. Locked himself in that house. Kept making keys, hundreds of them, like. He was trying to open something that wasn't there. Died in '89. Place burned again after that. No one's touched it since. Samir's throat tightened. What was he trying to open? Cal shrugged. No one knows. Some say he thought his wife was still in there, trapped. Others say he found something in that house, something that needed locking up, not opening. That night, the clinking was louder, more insistent, accompanied by a low hum, like a machine idling underground. Samir couldn't sleep. He sat by the wood stove, the tin of keys on the table, their edges glinting in the firelight. Around 3 a.m., he heard footsteps, slow, uneven, crunching on the gravel outside. He grabbed a hammer from his toolbox and opened the door, his flashlight sweeping the lane. Nothing. But when he turned the beam toward the field, he saw it. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing by the stone wall, holding a key that caught the light like a blade. The figure didn't move, its face hidden in shadow, but Samir felt its gaze, heavy and unyielding that he slammed the door, his heart pounding, and wedged a chair under the knob. The footsteps continued, circling the cottage, the clinking now a chorus of metal on metal. He checked his phone. No signal, though it had worked fine earlier. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor, and the keys in the tin began to rattle, as if trying to escape. Samir grabbed the tin and threw it into a drawer, but the sound didn't stop. It was everywhere, inside the walls, under the floor, in his head. The next day, he drove to the church site early, needing distance. But the keys were there when he returned, on the porch, in his toolbox, one even tucked into the pages of his sketchbook, next to a drawing of the church he didn't remember making. The drawing showed a door in the church's basement, one he'd never seen, with a lock that matched the rusted keys. He called the pastor, a kind woman named Ruth, and asked about the church's history. She hesitated, then said Elias helped build it, donated the locks. He was particular about them, said they kept things safe. Samir didn't go to the church the next day. He went to the ruined house instead, hammer in hand, driven by a need to understand. The field was slick with frost, the stone wall cold. Under his touch, the house's front door was gone, the frame charred and splintered. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ash and something sharper, like molten metal. Broken glass crunched under his boots as he moved through the first floor, finding rusted keys scattered across the floor, some melted into strange shapes. Upstairs, in a room with a single intact window, he found a workbench covered in tools, picks, molds, files, and a pile of keys, hundreds of them, spilling onto the floor. The hum was loud here, a pulse that made his teeth ache. He saw a trapdoor in the corner, its edges blackened, a heavy padlock securing it. One of the keys from his pocket fit perfectly. He hesitated, his hand trembling, then turned it. The lock clicked, and the trapdoor creaked open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The hum was deafening now, joined by a voice, not words, but a plea, raw and desperate. Samir's flashlight flickered, then died. He backed away, but the trapdoor slammed shut, the lock snapping back into place. He ran, dropping the key, and didn't stop until he was back in the cottage, the door barred. That night, the footsteps were closer, the clinking a cacophony, and the hum a scream. Samir packed his truck, ready to leave, but found a key in the ignition, a key he hadn't put there. The engine wouldn't start. He called Ruth, who arrived with a tow truck at dawn. She didn't ask questions, but her face was pale as she glanced at the ruined house. "Some things don't let go," she said softly. Samir left Merrow's Inn that day, staying in a motel until his contract was up. He never returned to the cottage. The landlord sent his deposit back, no explanation, and the church job was finished by someone else. Months later, Samir heard the ruined house had collapsed, the field swallowing its remains. He threw away every key he owned, but sometimes, in the quiet of a new apartment, he hears a faint clink, like metal on stone, and checks his locks one more time. The cottage on the edge of Merrow's Inn was razed a year later. The land sold to a developer who planned to build condos, but never broke ground. The field, the stone wall, the ruins, they're gone now, but the fog in Merrow's Inn still feels heavier near that lane, as if the air remembers. Samir settled in a new town, working small jobs, keeping his doors locked and his windows shuttered. He doesn't draw anymore, doesn't trust his hands not to sketch doors he's never seen. The keys stopped appearing, but he still wakes at 4 a.m., listening for a sound he prays he'll never hear again. A clink, a hum, a voice that wants him to stay. This concludes the 4-chapter horror story script, each chapter crafted to echo the unsettling tone, eerie settings, and psychological tension of the reference, while introducing unique plots, characters, and resolutions. Each story, Nora's encounter with the pulsing light, Julian's haunting taps, Claire's attic whispers, and Samir's endless keys, stands alone, yet they weave a shared thread of dread, rooted in the ordinary turned uncanny. The conclusions leave room for lingering unease, ensuring the horror lingers beyond the page, much like the original's chilling aftertaste.